Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. A very warm welcome to this Leatherhead Brexit webinar. My name is Cindy Beren, Operations Director at Leatherhead Food Research. We're speaking to you today from our offices south of London. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to my colleague and our speaker, Erica Short. Erica is part of the leadership team here at Leatherhead, and her background includes time as a technical director in the food industry and more recently in UK government across a range of regulatory functions, including the Department for Business Energy and Industrial Strategy, and also the Office for Product Safety and Standards. In addition to Erica, I'm also delighted to let you know that we have Dan Edwards, our Group Managing Director of our parent company, Science Group, joining us from our Cambridge office. Before we start, there are a couple of housekeeping things that I'll need to share with you. The presentation itself will last approximately half an hour, and there will be time for questions at the end. You are part of a large audience today, and to ask a question, you will see a panel on the right of your screen, where you can submit your questions at any time during the session. At the end, we will go through some of these. But for now, I'm sure you will all want to hear from Erica directly. Erica, over to you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good morning, good evening. I know we have a number of our clients on the phone from different parts of the world. So wherever you are in the world, you are really welcome. The first thing I wanted to say this afternoon is what an absolute privilege and a pleasure it is to be able to join you this afternoon, and hopefully over the next half an hour or so share with you some of our thoughts and insights in terms of where we are with Brexit, and certainly in terms of the specific implications for the food and beverage sector. As Cindy said, I have spent a significant percentage of my working life not just working in the food industry, but until quite recently working across Whitehall, largely for the Department of Business. So some of the insights I'm going to be sharing with you this afternoon will come very much from my time as a Whitehall civil servant, as I like to say, a recovering civil servant. So without further ado, let's crack on. So it seems like every minute of every hour of every day currently is filled with Brexit news and views. And that is not just the case in the UK, it's the case across the world. Everyone is looking at this issue for our economy and for the economy of Europe and wanting to understand what's going on. So how do you really know what you need to know? And how does the political commentary translate into real life issues for your business? How do you know where you need to start thinking, let alone planning, for any of the given range of scenarios that are still playing out and could still be possible post-March 2019? Nothing seems certain. So, given the huge levels of uncertainty, is planning still possible? Given the short time frames left before we exit the EU, is there still even enough time left to plan? There are a number of key areas for consideration in any business, but the nature and extent of the impact, and this is the point I think we really want to make very clearly this afternoon, is really business and product assortment and sector specific. So whilst there are broad issues that will affect the food and beverage sector generally, essentially every business needs to be thinking about its particular product category, assortment, infrastructure, frameworks, and everything that's going on in its particular business. Things around borders, imports, exports, transportation looming really quite large. Obviously the conversations going on around tariffs, packaging and labelling of goods, and of course critical issues around citizens' rights and the reliability of the issues around citizens post-Brexit. Commercial contracts will also need to be thought about, and data protection, which we feel like we've only just really got to grips with post-GDPR, but will continue to be a significant issue in any post-Brexit world. So, this afternoon we are going to cover, in broad terms, a number of key headline areas that we've been thinking about particularly that we think will be of interest. So obviously a headline update regarding Brexit particularly. I know lots of you will be following this on a daily basis, and we don't want to err too strongly on exactly what the process looks like. But what we are acutely aware of is that a number of our clients from across the world won't be so familiar with exactly what's going on, and will be looking at this from a very global perspective and not a UK-EU-centric one. We're going to be talking about regulation and standards and the juxtaposition between that and the free trade agenda, and asking you to think alongside us about what the future post-Brexit could look like. So essentially all of the issues right here, right now, are how it's going to play out and what's going to happen. And what we're really interested in thinking about is post that, what does that look like, and how is that going to play out? We're also going to touch on the position and influence of industry lobby groups, not just in a UK-centric way, but thinking about that more broadly and in terms of the post-Brexit world and what that looks like. And then finally, we're going to touch a little bit on the Leatherhead support package and what it is that we're going to be doing to support our clients, and indeed anybody who would like to be a prospective client moving forward. So here is a little bit of a look at the timeline. Well, it's absolutely unbelievable, isn't it, that after 2 years of negotiation, the agreed deal that Theresa May did with our European partners has been rejected twice by our Houses of Parliament, most recently on the 14th of February, which has sent us into a new wave, a new era of political rancour. The EU, I think, are probably of the opinion that if an agreeable arrangement couldn't be achieved within the 2 years, then it's certainly not going to be agreed in less than 2 months that we've got left. So serious preparations have been in play for a very long time now for a no-deal Brexit, and I can certainly reflect on this time last year when I was still a Whitehall civil servant, and all of the talk and discussion that we were having at that time. No deal was about as far away from what we were thinking as could be possible, and it was really not until in the late autumn that I think people started to really recognise that this was a real possibility. So in terms of the next vote, the next meaningful vote, that is currently scheduled to be on the 12th of March, and the expectation will be that that will be a vote on whether this deal, notwithstanding any amendments that Theresa May have got secured from the EU between now and then, will go forward. And if it does, well, we'll enter into a period of transition. That notwithstanding the fact that the agreement still has to pass through our Houses of Parliament, and it's widely considered to be impossible for there to be enough time for that to happen. So I think the first issue that we're all facing is even if the deal gets agreed, the possibility that could actually transit its way through the political process, I think is highly unlikely at this point. And then if the deal doesn't get accepted by our Houses of Parliament, then we are facing the potential that we will have a no-deal scenario. So, possible outcomes. Well, if a deal is agreed, that allows a transition period. I'm going to talk a little bit in a second about what that might mean. And obviously, no-deal scenario is very concerning for many sectors, and notwithstanding the issues that the food and beverage sector has. I think up until the beginning of this week, it was almost impossible that we were going to be including at this point a situation where we could have another referendum. Anybody that's been following the political narrative this week will certainly be aware of the fact that referendum is now being backed by our opposition and is very firmly potentially back on the table post-March the 12th voting. So again, for our international colleagues, for our international global clients that find all of this very challenging and frustrating, it's basically anything's possible still at this time. So if a deal is agreed, the transition period essentially means that the UK is out of the EU, but retains the same obligations as a member state throughout the transition period. So we remain in a customs union, we remain in the single market, and we remain in terms of making our contribution to the EU budget and following EU laws. And the whole purpose of transition was that it was always predicted that it would never be a long enough period of time for the UK and the EU to agree everything that needed to be agreed. And certainly my experience as I said, of working as a civil servant was that was always going to be the time for the real deals to be done. So in terms of transition, as and when we get to that point, our advice, what we'd be urging you to do is pay real attention to what the opportunities might be through transition. So if you're working within a particular sector, you have particular views about the rule set to which you're currently exposed, you feel that there would be some benefit to you in changing or altering the infrastructure of that, transition would be the opportunity to do that. So it's not a done deal as far as transition is concerned as and when we get to that place. As far as no deal is concerned, obviously, if there is no deal, there will be no transition. So literally overnight, we will be moving from a scenario where the UK has been an EU a member state to a scenario where potentially it is no longer, it is a third country, and there is still no certainty over what the policy or delivery of policy position would look like. So, up until a couple of days ago, that would have been the end of this part of the discussion. But as I'm sure many of you will know, a new issue arose earlier this week. There was a new commitment from the Prime Minister to take the meaningful vote to the 12th of March. And this timeline shows what that meaningful vote will actually entail. So this is essentially an opportunity for our MPs to vote on the deal, whether that's an amended deal, an improved deal. You may well be aware that the sticking block for many parties remains the situation around the Irish border and the backstop position that has been negotiated. And essentially, if we if we vote to accept that deal, whatever that deal looks like, then we will move essentially into a transitional phase. Notwithstanding, as I previously said, it's very unlikely that there will be enough time to get that withdrawal arrangement through, even if the deal is agreed. If the deal is voted down, then we move to a scenario to vote on a no deal, in which case MPs will be given the option to leave the EU on the 29th of March on time without a deal, or to vote for something else, which essentially at this point looks like a delayed Brexit opportunity. And you will have seen some of the narrative playing out over the past couple of days, which is pushing towards a situation where it's looking increasingly likely that the vote will be delayed. So, what does all of that mean in terms of where we're heading and what that's going to mean for your businesses in the food and drink sector? So I'm aware again that many of you are familiar with the current situation, the fact that we are in the EU, the UK is a full member of the EU, and essentially we trade under all of the conditions that the EU allow us to, and agreements with the EU and the rest of the world are those that we also benefit from. In the event of a deal, the rules essentially, so the rule set that your businesses will be operating under, essentially, broadly speaking, will remain the same during transition. And this allows a possible opportunity during transition, as I said, for you to think about the rule set and those that impact you. And when we talk about the food and beverage sector, food and beverage wide, there are a number of juxtapositions between the way that certain parts of the food and beverage sector feel about particular rule sets. So you will be familiar with things that you find favourable to your business, to your suite of products and services, and other things that you find may be a challenge. If an agreement on a trade deal, so the idea would be that through transition, the EU and the UK would be considering what the world would look like for them post the transition arrangements coming to an end. And if an agreement on a trade deal cannot be reached during transition, the Irish backstop, this real sticking block for a lot of UK MPs, would remain. So that would remain a scenario whereby that would prevail, and the arrangements that the current withdrawal agreement sets out for the transit of goods and people and services across the Irish borders would remain, and that is the primary sticking block. In the event of a no deal, this would see the UK potentially crashing out, meaning absolutely no transitional period at all, no transitional arrangements whatsoever, and no agreement with the EU on the trading relationship with immediate effect. So effectively, the UK will become a third country overnight, having to default, which I'm sure, again, a number of you have been following with real interest, WTO arrangements. Now, the WTO tariff and non-tariff barriers to trade are everything upon which a post-Brexit no-deal scenario would be based. But there does remain the question of the position of the UK within the WTO as a WTO standalone member. So why much of the narrative has been around that's the situation, we will default to WTO arrangements, there does remain the question of the UK as an independent member of the WTO. So, in terms of regulation and standards and the free trade juxtaposition, what does this actually mean? Well, in my experience, the narrative across Whitehall has remained throughout the whole Brexit process that the regulations around food and feed standards and animal welfare will not be eroded after Brexit. And this is a situation that's been set out by the Secretary of State for DEFRA, the Department for Food and Rural Affairs, Michael Gove, who has made it very clear that he will be working very hard to ensure that the UK remains at the forefront of food safety and animal welfare standards. Now, across Whitehall, so here is the interesting juxtaposition. Just because ministers and senior cabinet figures are part of the same government doesn't necessarily mean that they agree. And I think we have seen outside of collective cabinet responsibility, lots of individual senior cabinet figures aligning themselves with particular political positions. Now, that will be influenced by their own particular interests, by the way that they feel about Brexit per se, and will certainly be influenced by the constituencies and the populations of voters that they represent. Michael Gove's view has been made very clear. However, across Whitehall at the Department for International Trade, Liam Fox, who is the Secretary of State there, has made it very clear that he is all about free trade, and his aspirations are very obviously about opening the UK market up to free trade deals and opportunities for free trade. And just to share with you a little bit of my Whitehall experience, I spent quite a lot of time working quite closely with the Department for International Trade in their aspirations for a post-Brexit world. And a lot of the aspirational countries that we visited with teams of civil servants from both teams were very much focused on looking at the market opportunities and thinking about how the rule sets in those particular countries worked. So regulation is looming very large, not just in the current agenda around how things will be post-Brexit, but also thinking about the way that free trade is going to operate in a post-Brexit world. So if you think about a scenario whereby a British company may want to achieve some inward investment opportunities into a new market, which is what the Department for International Trade are all about, looking at the rule sets and opportunities within those countries and understanding what the challenges might be. From an inward investment point of view, the UK market, the poster boys and girls for this whole issue have been, you know, the chlorine-washed chicken and the antibiotics in beef. So these are the poster products, particularly from American markets. And potentially the juxtaposition is that on the one hand we're saying we won't erode our standards, and Department for International Trade saying, well, actually it's going to be a free market and we will let consumers decide whether they wish to eat these things and whether they wish to choose to have them. Now, from a UK market position, that potentially has some implications. The market could be open to substandard products, open to the choice of consumers to decide if they wish to consume them. There is an increased risk, obviously, of food fraud, of the market being open to products coming in, and increased challenges for businesses that want to continue to trade equitably and freely in the EU, to demonstrate the appropriate management of their ingredients. From a food safety management perspective, thinking about a mixed economy of raw materials and a mixed standards economy, whereas previously the UK market has only traded in the market economy that it understands, which is that of the EU. So some challenges certainly to be had as far as that's concerned. So the other thing that we wanted to talk to you a little bit about are the relationships between regulatory policy and regulatory delivery in a post-Brexit world. And this is all about the difference between the rule set per se. So everyone at the moment is fixated on what the rules are going to say post-Brexit. Are they going to be the same? Are they going to be different? If we have an opportunity to change things, how long does that opportunity pervade for? What is the influence and lobby that we can bring to these matters? But what also needs to be thought about very clearly, and we have been doing a huge amount of work on thinking about the interrelationships between the policy, the rule set, and thinking about the delivery, because business feels the pain at the delivery end. And I know we have a number of our regulator colleagues joining us this afternoon, and you will understand exactly what we're talking about. So this idea that the rules are the rules, but it is the interpretation of the rules, it is the way in which individual regulatory agencies and regulators themselves interpret the rules, and trying to get to a place where business not only understands the rules per se, but understands the full gamut of potential interpretations, so it can ensure that it is remaining compliant outside of just the rules per se. So it's not just about the policy, it's also about the delivery, and thinking about some of these things, headlining things. So ensuring that in the event of a deal or no deal, you're keeping up to date with what the issues are for your sector, your business, your products. The border, customs and regulatory border, would be introduced between the UK and the EU under a no-deal scenario. So the legal basis for free movement of goods would disappear, and this is something that everybody, if they're trading their goods between the UK and through the EU, needs to think about. Tariffs, paperwork, checks on standards would all be required by law, and preparedness for that is absolutely critical at this point. The government has said what it will do its best to minimise the change on goods coming in and waiving checks, but as we all know, being able and capable and having the resource available to do that, the whole delivery part of that is the pain that business is going to feel. So whilst it may say that, it's actually delivering that in real time that's going to be a challenge. I think indicative of that is the National Audit Office has said that as of last month, only 10 of the 12 new border IT systems were actually anywhere close to being ready. So that just gives you an indication of the challenge ahead. So there has been lots of discussion about citizens and what would happen around the rights of citizens in a no-deal scenario. That will impact on workforce, that will impact on not just workers within the food and beverage sector, although we all know that a significant number of EU citizens working in the food and beverage sector in the UK and vice versa in the EU, as with all sectors. And the Home Office has obviously put in place a registration scheme. There was a lot of narrative at the beginning of this week about the rights of EU citizens, and an amendment tabled last night in quite a high-octane political environment that was accepted by the UK government, and the rights of citizens has kind of come to the fore. So there is some indication that the rights of citizens are going to be agreed. The UK's agricultural policy, fisheries and continental supply chains for food and drink are all based on membership of the EU. And without a deal, there is definitely a policy gap, and a raft of new checks will be required for goods going into the EU. And whilst the UK has guaranteed current funding for farmers, so the farming sector very much influenced and interested in the subsidies it receives from the EU, there's no clarity over the UK's approach to this. Transport, increased checks have been an issue. The issue this week around heat-treated pallets has become really, again, high octane. The idea that there's not enough of them. If a third country status is what happens after the 29th of March, we're not going to have enough within the UK to access the EU market. How is that going to work out? Permits for transport, for trucks, getting across the borders, all of that remains an issue. There's not enough of those either. So these things are really pervasive issues that each and every food business would need to be considering at this point. Financial services in the event of no deal, there is also a huge spectre of issues around that, and although the UK government is currently committed to unilateral actions to minimise financial disruption in a no deal scenario, these things also need to be considered. So how you do your financial business will also need to be thought about. Energy and environment is the other one we've been talking about quite a lot, and the UK will no longer be bound by EU regulations, but that also means that potentially some EU functions around IT will be ceased to be, and thinking about what that means for the Irish question in terms of both Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic being joined by a infrastructure that is essentially the same as far as energy and the environment is concerned. Data and tax, well, we've just got over GDPR, and now we're thinking about what the implications for that might be. This could be particularly costly for small businesses where they are, working out what their implications are for personal data between the UK and trading that data between the UK and the EU. And obviously, in the event of a no deal, the UK loses access to all of the international arrangements. So the other thing we wanted to touch on was the position and influence of industry lobby groups, and we're going to start with the UK. These are just three of a multiplicity of food and beverage representative organisations who I have to say have done an outstanding job of lobbying and supporting and bringing their members' views to the heart of central government and to the heart of the whole Brexit debate. But there remains, if you are following any of this narrative, huge concern across the food and beverage sector about the implications on a sector-wide basis. And none of that is playing out any differently than it was 12 months ago. So the situation of concern about a no-deal scenario is still very, very much alive and well. So again, I would urge you, if you are a member of one of these organisations, then please do stay connected and please do continue to help them make your voices heard, because that is going to be absolutely essential. What's been a little less obvious, however, is the position and influence of industry lobby groups, and this goes back to the point I was raising about the global picture and thinking about a post-Brexit free trade world. So you may or may not be aware of some of these US-based organisations. We've identified these three as just examples. But in a post-Brexit world, there is a very, very heavy US-centric lobby going on for access to the UK and UK markets. Led largely around changes that the Grocery Manufacturers Association in particular would want to see to the WTO non-tariff barriers around sanitary and phytosanitary measures. So that should be of particular interest. So if you're not up to speed with the lobbying positions of various very powerful organisations within new free trade markets, then it would behove you all to keep abreast of that too, and we'll certainly be assisting our members with that. So we thought it would be helpful just to give you a couple of ideas about some of the things that we know that you've already told us are concerning you. So essentially, we've got a few here, just a taster of some of the things that will be of concern. Organic has loomed very large in our regulatory requests. Once the post-Brexit UK organic legislation is in place, so currently there is an arrangement trying to be done between the UK and the EU around what the UK organic legislation will look like. Once that process is completed, it will need to be checked and approved by the EU, after which time organic producers in the UK wanting to enter the UK market will need to register and be audited by a body registered in the member state. Now, that will be immediately in the case of no deal, and following transition in the case of a deal. So just to give you a taste and flavour, organic, if there is no deal, the immediate action will need to be taken by the 29th of March to make sure that your organic products are able to, to access the EU market. Organic labelling, EU logo, must not be used on any post-Brexit UK organic produce until or unless the UK achieve an equivalence agreement. As I said, that's ongoing. The UK approved organic status can continue to be used if it was approved before Brexit for produce on the UK market. This rule will apply again immediately in the case of no deal. So these are the types of scenarios we are urging you to consider, and after transition in the case of no deal. So in the case of a deal. So some of these things, will have immediate effect in less, just over a month's time. Moving on to claims, again, we are getting a significant number of our clients talking to us about claims. Those not approved in the EU will not be able to be used on packaging. If the UK claims are to differ, we need to wait for new regulations, so that will be something that will be borne out through transition. If a new claim is wanted, it will have to be submitted through a member state. So if you're wanting to do that, that is something that you will need to consider. And again, immediately in the case of a no-deal scenario, and after transition in the case of a deal. So there's been lots of narrative around labelling and the labelling rules not going to change, and that the UK will align all of its labelling rules to the EU, and that's all fine and dandy, and the food and beverage sector largely is telling us certainly, and indeed its trade representatives, trade body representatives, that that is the way that it wishes this to play out. However, there are some considerations set out here for labelling for export to the EU, and again, you will need to think about these immediately in the case of no deal and after transition in the case of a deal. So just some flavour of some of the issues that you may or may not be aware you are already facing, and things that you might want to be thinking about, given that no deal is very far still from being off the table. So a raft of other issues that we are continually getting questions and we can provide answers to pretty much on a daily basis. We've got a running narrative on where we are with all of these things. So as and when you think you might be impacted by these, it would be good for us to talk about them. So GM, again, looming very large in lots of people's minds, lots of our customers' minds. Country of origin labels, again, one that we have done quite a lot of thinking about and talking to people about. Eggs have some very specific challenges and opportunities, indeed opportunities. It's not all doom and gloom. And GI labels and logos are also important to think about. Importing food into the UK, we've talked about this already. We've had a lot of questions and queries about that, and we can support and answer many of those for you, so please do let us know. And novel foods, so the whole idea about who owns novel foods dossiers, who's going to be regulating that. This is an absolute prime example of the regulatory delivery policy juxtaposition and how this is going to play out. It's all very well to focus on the rules, who's going to be enforcing them, what does the regulatory infrastructure look like, what is it that you're actually going to be needing to do. So, in terms of the support that we can give, I know many of you who have taken the time and trouble to join us this afternoon are already in our family, in the Leatherhead family, in the Science Group family. We are very proud to say that we represent as many food and beverage organisations as we do, and we have done that for over nearly 100 years. This year, 100 years, we will have been doing that. Our real sweet spot is around the number of markets that we can support with, 150 plus, and brilliant regulatory experts here, covering over 20 languages, and it's a really impressive portfolio of support that we can give you. So for those of you who are members already, you will know this very well. For those of you who have joined us today and are not members and who are not known to us, well, hopefully this will just give you a taste and flavour of how we can assist. So in terms of how we can continue to support you, for all of our members, we would advocate that you would use your helpline time, usual helpline rules apply, and there is no additional charge for this service. Please consider talking to us about a tailored surveillance programme, and by that we mean a one-to-one environment. We're working with lots of our clients around this, doing workshops, fleshing out their specific issues, their inbound and outbound trading positions, where their goods and services are made and transported to, and supporting them with options in the event of a deal or no deal as to what it is so that they are ahead of the game, they know exactly what it is they're going to be doing. So we've done a number of these workshops. If you are interested in anything that is a one-to-one support package, please do email me directly. I'll be very happy to discuss that with you. And there will be, continue to be member-only Brexit webinar. There will be another one in April. If we feel that we need to bring that forward by virtue of the way in which the political environment is playing out, then we will certainly be doing so. An invitation will be sent to all of our members via email. So if you're not a member, it's been lovely to share some time with you this afternoon, and we would be very happy to talk to you about what membership benefits could bring. But certainly moving forward, these webinars will be for members only. So I think all that leaves me to say is thank you very much for your attention. I can see that we've got lots of questions. My colleagues here have been scribbling them down furiously, so I think we're going to go into the questions phase.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Erica. We have received many questions, and please do keep submitting your questions if you still have some. If we can't answer your questions today, Erica or one of our colleagues will get back to you very soon on those as well. So indeed, let's just have a look at a couple of those right now. So Erica, as a first question, could you please elaborate a bit more about the difference between regulatory policy and regulatory delivery?
Yeah, okay. I was expecting that. So whoever asked me that question, thank you very much for that question. It's a very welcome one. So essentially, as I said, everybody is always focused on the rule set, the rules themselves. People become obsessed with what the rules say and interpretation of the rules. And nobody more, I guess, than regulators themselves, and businesses in their want and need to comply will become obsessed with the detail of the law. But the reality, and certainly my experience when I worked for the Department for Business, was that businesses would never ring us up and say, I've got a real problem with regulation X subset Y or Z. What they would ring us up and say is, I've got a real problem with this particular approach to enforcement. I think I'm a compliant business. This regulator is telling me that I'm not. So this is about understanding not just the rules themselves, but the environment in which the enforcement community will be operating, getting some insights into the way that they are thinking and feeling, and understanding what their approaches to enforcement of the rules may look like. So gaining an insight into how regulators are thinking and what they are being asked to do is really important. And those two things need to live hand by hand. So when you ring us up and ask us a question about the rule set, what we'll be aiming to do is not just answer the question benignly. We'll be saying, well, the rules say this, and interpretation could look like this, this or this. Our insights would suggest that regulatory agency X might take this approach or that approach in this market. So it's dovetailing those two things together.
Thank you very much. Okay, as a second question, how aware are UK consumers on the potential impact of Brexit on the food and beverage industry and on themselves, the consumers?
Wow, that's a really interesting question, and I guess I can only give a very personal, subjective view on that, because we as an organisation certainly don't have any evidence to say, you know, how consumers are viewing this. I, as many of all of you, I imagine, when you sit around your dinner tables, when you go and engage with a conversation, when you represent an industry, a sector. I've been in the food industry pretty much most of my working life, apart from the brief sojourn I took into the civil service. And when you explain to people what some of these things mean, particularly I think around that free trade position and that Whitehall juxtaposition around, it's all very well saying everything's going to be the same, but largely if we achieve our free trade aspirations, everything will be different. And consumers' wants and needs, understanding how they are going to be informed to make a choice is really important. So thinking from a food business point of view about if you were going to differentiate your product and service in a different free trade market, what you would be doing to make it clear to consumers what it is that they were going to be buying. So I think the answer, anecdotally from my point of view, and I think from most of the people that are joining around the table this afternoon, is that consumers really are pretty ill-informed about what all of this actually means for them. They read the headlines, but in terms of how that translates to their shopping baskets and their takeaways and their restaurant experiences, I think they understand very little.
Great. I'll do one final one before we head over to Dan Edwards. In the case of no deal, is it expected that products have to be recalled from the EU market?
So again, that's a very, very specific question about products per se, and not all sectors, all products. I think the answer to that is is nobody can actually tell you that question, the answer to that question conclusively today. However, if we refined the products down to a particular suite, we would probably be able to give you a better indication than most of things that may form target products. So products of animal origin are pretty obvious. I think the outstanding issues around approved premises and health marks and all of that, I think they would be a real target for recalls. And if you think about what that actually might mean in terms of even getting goods back from the EU market, that would be, that would be quite challenging. The reality of it is, in the event of a no deal, there are no rules. No deal means no rules, and essentially each party within the game will play its scenario out as it sees fit, and these are the real challenges around predicting what might happen. So I think if the asker of that question, if the poser of that question could send us a bit more specificity, we might be able to give them a little bit more help. But I think high-risk products will be the softest targets for sure.
Great, thank you. So we've had more than 20 questions and still some upcoming. So thank you so much, everybody, for submitting those. We will get back to you on those questions. Erica or our colleagues will get back to you very soon. But for now, I thank you so much, Erica. Thank you again. And thank you also, listeners. But I first want to hand over quickly to Dan Edwards for some final thoughts.
Thank you, Cindy. And Erica, thank you. That was a great counsel and a great summary for us today. And for all of you that joined us, thank you for spending some time with us. Listening to Erica's presentation, I'd like to share my takeaway. And that's that this is a real-time management exercise for us all, probably lasting 2 to 3 years. And as managers, we're probably going to be taking action on a monthly basis across a range of specific topics and geographies. And I would encourage you to recognize a few things from Erica's presentation today. And the first is that there's a real dissonance and inconsistency across government departments that you should be aware of and seeing through. I think as individuals in your management roles in the food and beverage industry, you're going to have to choose whether to participate in the lobby efforts or not participate in the lobby efforts. And I think quite a few of us are going to have to staff up to deal with these topics as they come across our desk over the next couple of years. I would encourage you to reach out to our team at Leatherhead for some expert support there, and I wish you very good luck. Lastly, just a point of detail. This recording is going to be available via a link that you're going to get in emails after the event, and you're very welcome to share that link with colleagues. And if any doubt on how to get hold of us, then just get to us via our website, which is leatherheadfood.com. Okay, folks, thank you very much, and we are finished.